I mentioned earlier, the business has been around 15 years, and in that 15 years it's helped numerous companies produce improved productivity and make savings in their sort of investments in technology. So at top level, our value proposition is all about partnering companies in looking to reduce costs and make them more efficient, predominantly around their print and their documentation investments. And we do that through some very simple but very important techniques. Most businesses who do not have visibility of documentation and or printing in their business. And if you don't have visibility, you have no control. And if you don't have control and visibility, you can't drive efficiencies and savings in a business. Business facts these are actually new facts that we shared with Jet2 recently, but this is from Gartner statistics that the third largest cost after people and property is printing costs in any business. And that means the external and internal expenditures, document storage, retrieval management, document development and production, anything related to someone either producing something, printing something, storing something, trying to find it once they've done it, is the third largest expenditure in any business. Quote from Gartner. The biggest issue for the customer support productivity is downtime, print availability issues at help desk levels. Typically between 35% and 55% of problems in any one given month into any business are related to someone not being able to print or problems related to trying to produce or find documents. Another fact. However, most CIOs and senior management in businesses, this is not seen as a strategic area of focus. If you talk to IT directors, the top 10 things that are hurting them in any given year, printing tends to be one of the last things they think about. But actually, if you think about it, it's the third largest expenditure, and it creates 35 to 55% of their problems on a day-to-day basis. So it should become a priority. In fact, recently when I was with DS Smith CIO, he said those very words to me. He said, "Yeah, all due respect, print is not really important to me." And when I showed him this information, he went, "Now I realise why it should become more important."
So why do you think historically it hasn't been?
It's just because it's seen as printing is just seen to be something that people need to do to support the business. No one's ever looked at it on a strategic basis.
No one worries about ordering paper clips until someone runs out of paper clips.
I just wonder if it's historically people budgeted for printers individually, so it's never become no one's ever put the prices together to make that mountain.
Yeah. You'll see as you go through this, the way that organisations tend to go about it through silos has driven a lot of bad practice.
Yeah,
and that will come out as you go through it. So the point is that if you get focused on it, there's a huge opportunity to optimise the investments and improve the overall productivity of the business. And there are so many different values of it as we'll go through this later. Before we talk a little bit about the experiences and the value proposition that we've created and what our customers actually benefit from today, this again is an IDC report that goes back actually 8 years old. But this talks about the differentiation between a product device-centric approach, transactional approach, versus doing it from an enterprise business productivity approach. So the traditional photocopier companies that I'm sure some of you have dealt with will sit on the far left because they're motivated by product. You have then some more slightly mature businesses that are in the document management sector that are actually starting to talk a little bit more about document-centric businesses and solutions. But our model, even 8 years ago, we create a lot of innovation around being very business-centric. So we want to look at what the business needs, not what the supplier needs to supply to you. Yeah, and this far right illustration is you look at the cost of ownership of investments in technology generally. The great quote that you wouldn't describe buying PCs from Dell or switches from Cisco as a managed service. So why would you ever look at investments in printers in the same way? You need to look at it as the total cost of the ownership of buying that asset and supporting that asset through its life, but also making sure it's optimised support true productivity in the business. And there's one final quote for you before we talk a little bit about the experiences we take customers on. Is a Gartner quote at the moment that the good news is it's the right sizing and output of fleets, the hidden gold mine from Gartner. The amount of businesses that have a no control or visibility over their expenditure in this area is huge. And Gartner is expecting this to be a high priority for a lot of procurement and IT directors over the coming years. So kind of what we're doing here is setting the scene of what the potential is. And just to give you some indication, this is a bit of a busy slide, but this is a recent aviation company we work with. And the reason I'm putting this up is that it demonstrated the £75,000 per year over 5 years of potential savings. But the good thing about this customer is that they looked at the cost of doing nothing. Every day, every month, and every year that they did nothing about this problem, their costs went up exponentially by 5 or 10%. So if it's costing them X now, and they could save 75 grand if they move now, every year they don't move, that will increase by 5 to 10%. This is why this is an important thing to get hold of.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Jet2 or KLM?
This is John Mendes.
Oh, John Mendes.
I use that.
Of course.
I use that for Jet2 because obviously it was directly related to the aviation sector.
I love the cost of doing nothing.
Yeah, cost containment.
That, just the line, the cost of doing nothing.
So, in terms of areas that we're focused on as a business, because again, this is procurement director based, because this is obviously playing to them. So we've got kind of 3 tiers of focus that we're looking at. We're looking at direct cost savings, like paper, toner, external expenditure they have today. Right, that's the number 1 priority. We're also looking at reducing what we call indirect costs, so time, people's time, looking for documents, how long it takes them to buy toner, generating invoices for toner, approving invoices for toner. All of that stuff is part of our review. So we're really looking at it generally from a direct and an indirect perspective. Mm-hmm. And then we touched on in a moment about the future cost avoidance. The great thing about doing this right is when you do true optimization in this area, you can really start to drive a proven model that when you open an office or you buy a company, you have an operating model you put on them, and the minute you put that operating model on them, they reap the benefit of the optimization and the productivity. So it is about initial savings, but it's about cost containment as well. I tend to give you a great example of that. HCA is one of our big customers. We helped them build a solution in the Shard. Mm-hmm. Again, you're using a well-known name. They had 3 floors in the Shard. When we looked at their project plan, they had a traditional plan about how many printers they needed. We completely cut that by the 2/3, and we deployed a secure pen solution. Mm-hmm. That meant, that's a great example. If they hadn't had us at the table, they would have just gone off and done what they've always done, yeah, and not reap the benefit of true cost containment. So, what do we typically see? A traditional thing that we see in the market. Well, we tend to see organisations that are buying in silos. They've got procurement that own predominantly MFD investments, and they've got IT that own printers. And never the 2 things come together. They've got a very hardware-focused supply chain. They're motivated by potentially selling them a manufacturer of some type. They have a very volume-centric model. They have a limited IT deployment of that partnership. Very contract motive, very one-sided. It's not mutual. They don't look at the whole kind of process from paper coming into the office, how paper's produced, how much money they look at spending externally. So it's a very limited workflow consideration. It's about what output rather than what it is about how you automate. Lack of service focus and satisfaction from a user level, and it has limited experience in looking at how much money is spent on putting ink on paper from external. Again, we typically see that relationship's owned by marketing, and again, the marketing and procurement and IT functions don't have a joined up strategy. That clearly is the wrong way about going about it. But it's amazing how many organisations are still structured and operate in that way. The proven way, as you'll see later from some case studies I'm going to show you, is the polar opposite of that. It's about deploying less hardware, and we're not motivated by what the manufacturer is. Why the manufacturer, what badge is on the front of it is irrelative in the process of transformation. We want to get hold of volume and reduction. Why print the amount of paper that you print today? We typically see 20% of waste in most businesses that we engage with right off the bat, and that's before we start to talk about some of the other things we do. Very little structured ITIL and Prince2 policies and processes that are assigned to their investments in print and documentation. They have traditional contracts that are, our contracts are far more transparent and flexible. So we're talking about a service, not a contract. Our service is about automating much of what is a very manual intensive process in most businesses. We're very user satisfaction based. So we're not going to be focused on SLAs that are associated to break fix and how often things are fixed. Our focus is on how happy your users are. And that's the optimum area that we want to get to. If your users aren't happy and they're not productive as a business, that should be our acid test as partners. We're looking at the ability to bring in incumbent supply chains into the solution, because we need to make sure we're driving best practice through both IT and procurement and marketing in other areas. We're very focused on continuous improvement. We're definitely looking at bringing integration into our solutions around automation of documentation, workflow within the environments, and effectively reducing the need for printing paper in the first place. And as I said earlier, we're looking at also including the consideration for integration of external spend as well. The great thing about the way the model's been refined is that we really have created a market that is capable of people incapable of engaging us depending on their level of maturity. So we see customers that have never looked at this, you know, the virgins of this world that actually have got no idea, right? So clearly the opportunity with those organisations is to take them on quite a huge transformation journey. We also find customers that have actually done some form of managed print document solution, but actually haven't got best in class and really have got a lot of areas where they could improve it. And then you have organisations that are on that maturity level stack, but they can also benchmark what they have today against what our overall capability is. So it doesn't really matter where you think you are on that journey, it is worth engaging with Carlson to look at how we can potentially help you as a business. So it really depends on what ambitions you've got, but we don't want to preempt that. We need to understand more about how you're structured today before we engage. So really, as most things, the wider the scope, the greater the savings. It really depends on where you are on that stack. If you're, if you look at an organisation that has the ability to look at it from an enterprise perspective, or we can look at all aspects of how we automate you as an organisation, clearly the savings are greater. So the smaller the scope, the lower the savings are, the wider the scope, the greater the potential is. One great example of that, if you're dealing with one organisation related to how paper goes through your office, then you have less suppliers, which means you have less supply chain management, which means that you ultimately can save more money. So what does that innovation picture look like? We've developed 3 iterations of our managed print service offering to directly relate to the 3 different iterations of the type of engagement with the customer that I alluded to earlier, the virgin, the people that may have had some sort of investment, and those organisations have. So we developed a primary NPS, an expanded NPS, and an enterprise NPS. And it's a bit like a Rubik cube. Each customer kind of takes a little bit of the primary they always take, because that's the basis of getting most of it right, but we can bring in other elements in it. So, for example, if we want to bring in automation, we want to bring external print into the primary service, we will do. If that customer wants to do that later down the line, that's their prerogative. So we'll take it in either bite-sized chunks, or we'll bring services in early. And obviously, if they want to look at 3D printing, or they want to look at wider workplace technology, bringing in